After 30+ conversations with manufacturers, machine shop owners, robotics companies, foundries, integrators, I started to notice the same pattern over and over again. Not something people were saying directly, but something that kept showing up underneath everything. And once you see it, you realize most companies in the industry are playing the wrong game. Because every product you've ever used, your phone, your car, even something as simple as a lawnmower, was not made by one company. It was made by hundreds and sometimes thousands of completely different businesses. And once you understand that, you stop seeing products and you start seeing something else. Most people think manufacturing is simple. One company makes a product, one factory builds it, and one brand owns it. That's the story. But it's wrong. And the more conversations I had, the more obvious that became. Because no one is operating alone. Everyone is connected to something else, depending on something else, feeding into something else. But here's the problem. Most companies still think like they're independent. And that's where things start to break. You look at a lawnmower, and your brain simplifies it. Walker Manufacturing makes this. And yeah, that's true. But it's also misleading. Because when I talk to Bob Walker, you realize that they're not just making a product. They're coordinating an entire system. They're using engines from Kohler. They've invested in things like laser cutting, robotic welding, and that's not even the interesting part. The interesting part is what that forces them to rely on. Because every time you say they use this supplier, what you're really saying is they depend on something outside of their walls. And every one of those dependencies has its own dependencies behind it. So now you don't have company product, you have company network. And this is where it clicked for me. These companies don't just make things, they sit in positions inside of a much larger system. Suppliers, technology providers, material sources, integrators, they're all connected. So what you're really looking at isn't a product. It's a network. Quick pause. Most manufacturers are sitting on better marketing than they realize. It's in their sales calls. It's in their production meetings. It's in the way their team solves problems every single day. But none of it gets captured. None of it gets distributed. None of it turns into visibility or pipeline. That's what we fix at Manufacturing Growth Systems. We help manufacturers turn the knowledge already inside their business into content, distribution, and sales. Because the world doesn't need more generic marketing. It needs to hear from the companies actually building things. Let's go deeper for a second. Take something like a casting. A foundry produces it. Simple enough. But where does it go? Into something else. An engine or a machine, a product you'll never think about again. I talked to a company producing castings in days, using 3D sand printing. Days. What used to take weeks now can happen in 1 week. And that one improvement doesn't just affect them, it ripples through everything. Faster production, shorter timelines, different expectations. That's one part in one system, connected to hundreds of others. This isn't a supply chain, it's a supply web. All right, let me explain this differently, because this part matters. Automation kept coming up in these conversations over and over again. Companies building robotic systems, welding automation, production lines, they're not making the product, they're enabling the product. And what I kept hearing was this: automation isn't optional anymore. So now the network expands again, and not just parts. It's capability. Another quick pause. If you believe manufacturing deserves more attention, more respect, and a bigger voice, go to manufacturingruntheworld.com and join the community. That's what we're building here. A place for the people, companies, and stories behind the products, the machines, the parts, the processes that keep the world moving. Because manufacturing does run the world, but too often the people doing the work are invisible. So join the community, and at the very least, follow Manufacturing Runs the World wherever you're watching or listening. Help us amplify the industry that builds everything. At some point, this stopped being something I was just talking about, and it started becoming something I was actually part of. This is where it gets really interesting, because once you see the network, you start seeing connections other people don't see. Let me give you a few real examples. I'm talking to Mike over at Kimura Foundry. They're doing some really advanced work with sand casting. At the same time, I'm connected with companies like PSC Couplings, and it hits me. These two could probably work together. So I connected them. Now there's a real conversation happening around producing cast components. That's not content. That's movement inside of the network. Then I'm talking to Samantha Snabes over at RE3D. They do some pretty cool self-sustaining large-scale 3D printing. And at the same time, I've got relationships with Ellison and GSC. It was two completely different conversations, but when you understand the system, you start seeing overlap. So I connected them. Now Samantha's team is doing SolidWorks training with GSC. Same thing happened with automation. I'm talking to Dan Alford. He's got deep welding automation experience. Then I've got relationships with Weldall. And again, it clicks. So I connect Dan and Darren over at Weldall and let them explore where automation and welding could fit together. And here's the point. None of that happens if you think in terms of my business, my customers, my industry. It only happens when you start thinking in terms of the network. And once you see that, something else becomes really clear. Not all companies inside of the network are equal. Some are easy to replace. They compete on price, they chase work. Others are embedded, relied on, hard to remove. Same industry, different position. So let's bring this back to you. You're not just running a shop. You're operating as a node inside of this giant system. And your future depends on where you sit inside of that system. So here's the one thing. Your growth has less to do with how good you are at making something, and it has everything to do with your position in the network. If you're stuck chasing work, competing on price, dealing with inconsistency, it might not be your capability. It might be your position. So now you've got a choice. Keep thinking, we just need more customers. Or start asking better questions. Who depends on us? Where do we create leverage? How do we become hard to replace? Because once you see the network, you can't unsee it. If you're in manufacturing, this isn't just a podcast. It's a network. And the goal for me is simple. Help you understand where you fit and who you should be connected to. So if you want better opportunities, stronger positioning, and real conversations with people building in this space, come join us. ManufacturingRunsTheWorld.com. And if you're trying to figure out where you actually sit in all of this, reach out. Don't just watch the system. Figure out where you belong in it.